I got attacked by four guys who tried to smash my head in with bricks. They didn't know me, and I didn't know them. But I'd say I was a representation of something they felt had historically oppressed them. They didn't know I
Right.
was from Canada or anything like that. So it was race related. I was white, they were black. I don't hold that against them,
No,
but
no.
that was the primary one of the primary drivers. It happened at night. I was kind of alone. Like it was just really terrifying to go through. And so the follow-up from that was my coping mechanism, instead of say drugs or alcohol, was food.
Hello, I'm John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia. And for all those people watching us from around the world, Prince George is in the center of British Columbia. And British Columbia, Canada, is a beautiful province. Prince George is about 500 miles north of Vancouver, or for those people in Europe, about 800 kilometers. It puts it in the middle of the province, big province, from east to west and from south to north. It's in the middle. It's a beautiful day, and we have a very, very special guest today. His name is Jonathan McLernon, right? Correct?
McLernon,
McLaren? Okay.
you
So,
bet.
and he's a very special guest, and especially in regards to weight loss and emotional coaching that relates to diets and all things. As I look at you and kind of read your bio, all things that make you healthy mentally, physically in particular, and makes you live longer and better, and quality of life is obviously very critical.
It is.
Jonathan, tell us a little
Hmm.
bit about your background. First and foremost, where are you located? Are you in Canada?
I am. So I'm located in Red Deer, Alberta, and so if I was to drive north about an hour and get to Edmonton, I'd be close to parallel with Prince George in Alberta. And it's
Right.
funny. I was born in Vancouver, British Columbia.
Okay.
So when we hear about Prince George from what we call the Lower Mainland, we think Prince George, that's way up north. But you're right, it's actually in the middle, and there's a lot of empty space between that and then and when you get to the Yukon border. Whereas in Alberta, we're quite a ways north from say like Vancouver, and Red Deer is it's a small city of about 100,000 people. It's we call it the cleavage between Calgary and Edmonton.
Right. And then, but you also spent some time. You were born in Vancouver, and
Hmm.
then you also spent some time in Victoria. And
That is
Victoria is the
correct.
capital of British Columbia, an absolute
Yep.
beautiful, beautiful area that most people, I talk to them about Canada, and the things that they always remember is Victoria first and Vancouver, and then the rest of Canada. It's a big, big country, and I love it here, right?
Yeah. I feel like I'm very fortunate and that born in Vancouver. I lived 9 years in Victoria, one of the most beautiful cities in all of Canada. A very moderate, temperate climate. Now where I live, I'm actually maybe an hour and a half from the Rocky Mountains, and so I live in the basically in the backyard of where a lot of people travel from all over the world to get to like Banff and Jasper and the Icefields Parkway. It's all within like 1 or 2 hours drive to get there, and so I feel very fortunate in that regard. But what comes to the territory can be some pretty harsh and cold winters, which we didn't get in Victoria.
Yeah, and that's so interesting to talk about because I came here from Holland in
Mm,
1965. Yeah, I was born November the 1st, 1940, so I'm in my
yeah,
84th year. I'm 83 right now. And then, so I came here, wanted to build, my dream was to build a lumber mill. And so the province then is Alberta, is BC. That's where all the timber is. So is Alberta to a certain extent, but I wanted to go
it
to
is. Yeah.
BC and then came to Vancouver and then talked to the immigration department there and told them what I wanted to do. And they said, Prince George, it's a booming town. That's where they have all the sawmills, pulp mills, plywood plants, and that's where you should go. So that was 60 years ago. And then Started with nothing really. I had couldn't speak the language, didn't know soul, didn't have a job. Started as cleanup man at $25.47, and but I had the dream. I was going to build a lumber mill, and I did. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, a little bit more. But the other part about it is that I worked very, very hard here and built different companies, including a lumber company. And then the problem that I had is that to build something from the ground up, you have to give it all that you got. And I used to work
Yeah.
24/7 as long as I could stay physically awake and to build my companies. But I was always at the mill or at one of my other businesses. So we decided, my wife, myself, to we should have a place away from here so that I can take some time off over the weekend. I
Yeah.
do that
Good
now
idea.
Friday afternoons. I fly to Victoria, and we have a
Hey.
place that you will know is in North Saanich.
Oh, beautiful spot.
Yeah, and it's about 20 minutes, 30 minutes from Victoria,
Yeah.
and it's physically at the highest point in North Saanich where we look over the water. It's close
Mm.
to the airport, within 5 6 minutes from the airport, and so I fly back and forth to wherever I go. But I usually go Friday afternoons. I travel to Victoria for the weekend, come back Monday mornings to Prince George.
That's fascinating because when I was at University of Victoria, I was about 19 years old, so maybe 2001. I also had a sort of a landscaping business on the side, and one of the properties that I helped to landscape was in North Saanich, up on this hill, and it was a mansion that had previously been owned by a psychologist whose wife got ill and passed away. And then the young fellow that bought it, he was like a tech multimillionaire, made his money in oil and gas down in Texas, and then bought this property. And it had this winding driveway that went up and kind of almost like even around the house. And so at different parts in the driveway, you get to a different level in the house. It was like a five-story Mediterranean style house. And I wish I could remember where it is. But when you talk about sort of being up on top, that's exactly where this was set. And you have this beautiful view of like where the ferries come in. You're right, the airport's there, and you're about 30 minutes from Victoria, and it's just this incredible setting. I just remember he also had a Dodge Viper, and I thought I was at 19 years old. I was like, this is an incredible car. One day I would love to own a Dodge Viper. But so when you speak about North Saanich and being up on a hill, that's kind of what I picture.
So that's very close to what we have. We found that property in 1997, and then
Hey,
started building and it was one of the unique properties that were physically at the highest point in North Saanich, and you could look all the way to Mount Baker,
no
all the
Baker.
way in the distance, and then you could look at the one side you saw Salt Spring, and on the one of the
Yeah.
islands for our guests watching. On the other side, you saw Sydney, and then the
Mm.
ferry. So it was very close to the location that you have, and the house is just amazing. It is unique. We designed it ourselves, hired an architect. We had a landscape designer involved right from the beginning. Jonathan Craig was his name, the
Okay.
landscaper, and it is just an absolute amazing property. Then we were able to also acquire about 50 acres within 5 minutes of our location on West Sandwich
Hey.
Road, and that's probably the most beautiful farm in all of the Lower Island, I believe. And we have an arena there, and we have 7 horses. Both my wife, myself, ride English dressage, and developing that property as well. So it's every time I fly in there, all the way from here, and I look out of the window, I say it's paradise. It
Oh, it
doesn't get
is. It
any
is.
better.
Right, because you'd get a pretty decent winter in Prince George as well. You're
We
up
do,
there,
yeah.
yeah, and so it builds character. Because I was thinking Holland, it's so close to the water, and you know, you would get a winter there, but I imagine it not being well. North Atlantic can be pretty cold, but you get like these ocean breezes that.
Very similar to Victoria, Jonathan, I would say.
Mm-mm.
So what we used to say in Holland, the difference between winter and summer is in the wintertime the rain is colder.
Right. That's a good way of
So
putting it.
yeah,
Um, I'm always impressed by Dutch ingenuity. I think it's marvelous what they've done with this little country the size of a postage stamp that's below sea level with all of
correct.
these systems like dikes and dams and things like that to like control the sea, building floodways, building parks that can serve as flood reservoirs and things like that. Like it is impressive and sort of Dutch engineering ingenuity. Also like in the shipping trade around the world as well. I think they're very famous for that too. So. I think it's a very admirable little country.
And if you look at the size of the country and then this relatively small population, it played a major role in the history, especially in the financial history, and some of the larger companies in the world, in
Mm,
particular, were VOC, is the Dutch East Indian Company
right?
that
Yeah.
a lot of people don't know this, but the largest ever company in the world ever, I believe Apple is close to $1 trillion capitalized.
Mm,
This
yeah. Yep.
this company VOC was $9 trillion capitalized, the
Right.
biggest ever company compared to some of the other ones, and uh,
Yeah.
I'm somewhat related to them. The chair of that is part of our family tree, but they didn't leave me any money. At one point, he said
You,
there was $1 billion in the Bank of England. I sent him a letter and said, "Okay, I'd like to draw out my $1 billion." He said, "No, we don't have money." So, anyway, so now, okay, there we go with that story. So you have an interesting bio because you were able to lose 100 pounds.
mm,
And to do that is amazing. I know many, many people, including myself. I lost 20 pounds every so often and all of it, but 100 pounds. So, what happened and what did you do and how did you go about it and how were you able it changed your life, no question about that. And how were you able to do it? And how long ago was it? And have you been able to keep it off and change your lifestyle as a result of it?
well, I like to joke that I've actually lost about 600 pounds. But that's really just in reference to the fact that I lost and gained weight a number of times. And originally, the original weight gain was really a byproduct of going through a very traumatic experience while living in South Africa. And if there's time, we can certainly explore that as a story, how that's affected my path in life and in terms of what I now do professionally. But people are often disappointed when they hear, well, 100 pounds, how long did that take you? And I say, oh, about 6 years. Um, because we have this idea that's kind of presented to us by the sort of the fitness, health, weight loss industry that here's how it should look like, 2 pounds, 3 pounds a week kind of thing in X number of months. This is what it should look like. But really, we don't kind of work in that fashion. So for myself, I had to work through binge eating and food addiction and anxiety and depression, some of the mental health issues that came from going through trauma and struggling. And so um, you'd think, oh, it should be so simple. Follow this diet plan. You know, eat less, move more, that kind of thing. But for the longest time, I didn't understand about the mental and the emotional and psychological and even the neurological side of things. There's a lot of people, myself included, who live in what we call the know-do gap, or the gap between knowing and doing. Many of us have, I mean, we live in the age of information. So coming to terms with the fact that my struggles weren't so much about lack of information, but really lack of implementation, and then trying to understand why. And so, in a sense, the mechanics are still, lifting weights, being active, eating better, managing stress, sleeping well. But most people know that this is what it takes to be healthy. It's how do you get to the place where this is what you do and you make this your way of living? And that's the tricky part. And when people don't understand where the struggles come from and why it is that we struggle, this is when where they turn the blame towards themselves. And they can be very, very harsh, very self-critical. But I like to say that you can, pardon me, you cannot punish your way into vibrant health. You cannot beat yourself up into being healthy. There needs to be a different way. And so for me, it was when about 2017, I hired a coach. At that point, my highest weight I was about 330 pounds. At that point, I was down to about 295 pounds. Still a very big man. I'm about 6'1", and I was feeling pretty hopeless because I got down to about 230 pounds, so I'd lost 100 pounds, but
So
then it ended up
where were you then physically, Jonathan?
so yeah, in 2017, I'd regained about 65 pounds. So I'd went from, I'd lost 100 pounds, but then I'd regained 65 pounds. And that was incredibly discouraging because I knew how much work I'd put in to lose 100 pounds. And I couldn't understand, like, what went wrong? How did I worked so hard? Like, how did this get undone? And that really started a very interesting journey that continues to this day.
Were
It is
you
a
located
journey.
then
Oh,
in
sorry. I was
Canada?
located in Red Deer. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'd come back. So the incident had happened in South
2017, you
Africa.
were in Red Deer, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the incident happened in South Africa in 2011. We came back to Canada at the end of 2012 after about 3 years of just being world nomads. So my wife and I were traveling around the world.
Okay, can I
We
just
ended up,
interrupt you for a second?
please
So I
do.
saw something about South Africa, and then I
Yeah,
thought, and then you had some challenging experiences there because you nearly got murdered,
this is
right?
true. Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
and
Uh,
but at that point, were you already married when you were in South Africa?
yes. Yeah.
Okay,
Uh, and I'll take one step back and just drop this little anecdote. So
okay,
my wife and I met in Victoria. At the
okay,
time of recording this, it was 21 years ago. Um,
okay.
she got dropped into my lap. She met some friends of mine in Vancouver back in early 2003, January 2003. They called me up and said, "Hey, we have this cute Aussie girl. She's from Australia. Do you want to hang out with her?" And of course, I'm like, what 21-year-old guy isn't going to be like, "Yep, absolutely." When you say, "Do
Yeah,
you want to hang out with this cute Aussie girl?" So we hung out for 2 days. Then she took the ferry back to Vancouver and carried on with her life. And I thought I'd never see her again. But she had given me her email address. We communicated back and forth for about 2.5 years, eventually talking on the phone quite regularly. She flew back to Vancouver almost 2.5 years to the day from the time we first met. In that time, we didn't have social media. I'd had one photograph of her mailed to me, and it was like a school photograph that was a couple of years old. And I'd said to her, "How am I going to know that it's you? You're flying into Vancouver in July, the busiest time of the year, in one of the busiest airports in the world."
how am I
And she
going to
said,
find
"Oh,
you?
yeah." I said, "Oh, I'll wear a colorful hat." That's what she told me. So the time comes, and the doors open at the Vancouver airport. When you walk out of customs, and
Yeah,
you have to kind of walk past down this railing,
I know
and
the
out comes
place.
this girl wearing, yeah, out comes this girl wearing a tiger costume, full suit, head to tail, with a tail, tiger costume, bouncing behind her trolley. I was like, "That's the one.
That's
There's
her.
no mistaking this." And
Yeah,
so that was an incredible surprise. So from that day, I knew I was going to marry her, and I said, "That's it. She's the one." And we moved to Australia, got married over there, came back to Canada, and then started our world travels, which then eventually took us to South Africa.
right.
Yeah. So then on return from South Africa, so it was about 6 months that I'd gained about 120 pounds. So I'd really gotten very significantly overweight after going through that trauma in South Africa. So I was nearly beaten to death. And I really didn't know how to deal with that. I mean, most people aren't equipped to deal with a significant trauma like that, myself included.
What
And
happened? What was it? Somebody attack you, or what happened?
yes, four men attacked me. So we were living out on a nature reserve. We were teaching. So our occupation at the time was facilitators
Johannesburg, or
for
where was it?
in Grahamstown, actually.
Okay, yeah,
So halfway between, if you know South Africa, it's halfway between Port Elizabeth and East London, in the
big
south,
city.
basically the southeast corner. Yeah, Grahamstown was a city of about 300,000, kind of a university city. It was supposed to be a smaller
Yeah,
city, safer, that kind of thing. Yeah, I got attacked by four guys who tried to smash my head in with bricks.
Why?
And so, I say they didn't know me and I didn't know them, but I say I was a representation of something they felt had historically oppressed them. They didn't know I
Right.
was from Canada or anything like that. So it was race related. I was white, they were black. I don't hold that against them,
No,
but
no.
that was the primary one of the primary drivers. And so, um, yeah, so that was obviously it happened at night. I was kind of alone, like it was just really terrifying to go through. And so the follow up from that was my coping mechanism, instead of say drugs or alcohol, was food,
Nearly
and it
killed you.
just opened the doors. Yeah. So I just started eating like relentlessly. And a part of me kind of like people would say, well, didn't you realize you were gaining this weight? And it's kind of hard to explain if someone hasn't been through trauma. There was this like dissociation from my body that I couldn't quite explain. Like I was not registering what was physically happening in my body because I was in this fight or flight survival mode all the time because we stayed on living in South Africa. And you start to everywhere you look, you're like, is this person going to jump me? Is this person going to attack me? Like not sleeping at night, like it was, suffering from PTSD. It was really hard to be like physically aware of what was happening until we got back to Australia, where my wife's from, about 5 months after the incident happened, and it just kind of hit me. Like, what have I done to myself? How did I get here? And it was so immensely like discouraging and depressing and frustrating. Like I didn't know what I was going to do. I ended up getting a job at a cotton farm in like
But by now
rural
you
in
over
Australia.
300 pounds?
Oh yes, yes. I was getting to my peak weight of about 330 pounds. So I gained that weight over just under 6 months. Um,
Right.
it's shocking that it could happen that fast. But I have a voracious appetite. But I was very physically active and probably kept it at bay through that. Now I'm this now I'm this morbidly obese guy. And so I got a job in Australia, in Queensland, um, in rural Queensland, at a cotton farm. So digging irrigation ditches, just physical hard labor kind of thing. And thankfully, I didn't have a heart attack. And I managed to probably lose about 40 pounds in like 3 months of this like hard physical labor. Because when you're overweight, like significantly overweight, you can actually lose more weight more rapidly. Um, So then we resumed our travels. So we left from Australia. Instead of going back to Canada, we did a reverse trip around the world again. So we flew back to South Africa because we wanted to have a bit of a positive experience. Then we flew up to Turkey. This is 2012 now. Flew up to Turkey where my brother lives. He lives in Istanbul, still does to this day. And then we went back to Poland where we had lived, and then back to Italy where we had lived, and then back to the UK before finally returning back to Canada.
You lived there with your family before when you with your parents and two other different countries, right?
Um, it was actually just my wife and I. Well, we lived with my wife's parents when we were in Australia.
Right.
Um, and in Turkey, we lived with my brother for about 3 months.
Okay.
Um, and so yeah, and then it was 2013, so a little over 10 years ago that we moved to Red Deer. Um, at that point, I was probably walking around at about between 250, 260 pounds, kind of my walking weight. I could call it that. Um, I eventually got into the nutrition and supplement industry, and I thought, okay, I'm 265 pounds. Who's going to take me seriously when I'm selling like fitness supplements and things? They're going to look at me like I'm a big chunky guy. Like, what am I doing here? Um, but I'm pretty smart. I know the stuff inside out. I'm like well educated, and I've got a great memory. I can't take the credit. I got it free of charge. um, but so I set my sights on, okay, I'm gonna get down to like 230 pounds, and I did. I got there, but then went through quite a bit of stress again, sort of some business and family stress and things, and regained all like up to about 295 pounds. That brings us to about 2017 in Red Deer, and I think, okay, I've undone all my hard work. Like it was so immensely discouraging and distressing because I thought I'd worked so hard to get here. What have I done? What I didn't realize or know about our biology at that time is we have what I call a famine biology. That is, our body wants to store fat because for most of human history, we had to work really hard to get food, and there wasn't a lot of it. So we had to be very efficient at storing fat. So we can store fat very quickly when the circumstances are right. And when it comes to losing it, our body wants to lose it slowly to make it last because biologically, body fat is stored energy for famines.
Right.
But I didn't know any of this. So, and once you have your fat cells created, they're yours for life. Um, that you can empty them, you can shrink them, but yours for life. They're waiting to be refilled the moment you start like eating over the top again. And that was
Yeah.
one of my struggles. Was this binge eating, this excessive eating, this food addiction, trauma coping mechanisms. And so as I
If you
started to sort of
say
go down that path,
if you say excessive eating means
mm,
volume,
yes, primarily when it's binge eating, it's primarily connected to volume. So I could
right?
eat like an entire extra large pizza in one sitting, and I would
Yeah.
basically make myself sick. Um, some of it, and it's hard for people to grasp this, but some of this would even be what I call spite eating. So I was so like self-loathing. I hated my body. I hated what I had become. I used to be an athlete, and I hated how I'd become obese. And so
Say,
when I couldn't,
Jonathan, can
yeah,
I ask you a question? So what comes
please
to
do.
my mind is that the a lot of emotion involved in this and trauma
Yes.
and things related to that and I'm just in my own mind wondering. I see that with people just the opposite, where they stop eating, because they become skinnier and skinnier, even to the extent of putting their own health in jeopardy and maybe
Mm,
resulting in death in some cases. Is it the
yeah.
opposite of that? Which, and I'm not a doc, obviously.
Yeah.
I'm just
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
my own mind looking at it. How could that happen? Well, there are other reasons behind it. In a lot of cases, emotion, trauma, PTSD, and results of
Mm,
all of those things, likely or maybe.
yeah. Absolutely. We all respond to stress differently. Um, and so in my case, it was the eating thing.
Right.
That was what I did. So as I said, I really hated my body and what I'd become. So I would go to the gym and I would work out hard. I got into powerlifting, and I just thought like I will somehow like I'm going to force my body to lose this weight. I was taking excessive stimulants, just really driving myself into the ground. I nearly had a nervous breakdown at 35 years old, about 7 years ago, because I was like beating my body up so badly, trying to force my body to do something, but because I didn't know how to change my behavior. I didn't know how to, like, what do I do about this? And I was so ashamed of my behavior. How could I be educated, be well traveled, know all this stuff? I even advise people on this stuff. I'm a successful coach of other people. How can I not do this? Like, what is wrong with me? I am the most worthless, hopeless human being. You get really into some pretty distressed states of being, and that was where I found myself in 2017 when I was almost 300 pounds again.
Yeah.
So then along comes this coach, and it was from in my mind this was like a last ditch thing. So I'd applied for some life insurance
In Red Deer, right?
in Red Deer. That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
And as a part of when you apply for life insurance, you have to go through a physical.
Yeah.
And when I got weighed, and I was like 295 pounds, and I couldn't get my blood pressure down, and they had to put what's called a rider on my life insurance policy. So that's an extra fee you pay because you're at higher risk of dying,
Correct.
basically. And it was so humiliating in one sense because of how I felt about myself, but also like this huge wake up call. Like I have to do something different. So I hired a coach, uh, uh, and thinking like I want to look like him. He was in his 40s at the time, probably still is, late 40s now, natural bodybuilder. I'm hiring him. Hopefully he'll help me look like him, and maybe I won't hate myself so much. Well, he didn't treat me the way I expected he was going to treat me because I was very hard on myself. Self-loathing, self-hating, tremendous negative self-talk. I just expected he was going to like, tell me what a horrible waste of a human being I was too. And instead,
Not
I
so.
was literally just, yeah, I was trying to convince him. Like I basically just wanted the cop out. I'm going to prove to you that it's impossible for me to lose this weight and get healthy. You can't help me, but I have to try anyways so that I can finally just be a victim for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And
Give me
instead,
the
he
excuse,
modeled,
right?
right, right. So, but instead, he really modeled compassion. And that was so crucial for me because I had this misunderstanding about like what is compassion. I thought it was weakness, soft, kindness, like respect. No, you got to punish your way into this. And here he was, like, instead of like beating me up when I'd go and have a binge or something and tell him about it, being like, all right, just give it to me. You might as well tell me. And he's like, okay, let's get curious. Let's figure out what happened here. Let's get rid of this idea that you're a terrible human being. So he was able to see some potential in me that I really couldn't see in myself. And he modeled for me compassion in a way that helped me to learn self compassion. And so now a huge part of what I do is I call it my compassionate curiosity. People come to me and they want to lose weight and tell me what to eat, tell me what to do, how to be active and so on. And it's like, let me know your story. I want to hear your story. What happened in your life? Let's figure out how you got here. And let's get rid of this idea that you're a terrible person because nobody puts up their hand and says I want to be obese. Like no one says like I'd like to be morbidly obese, depressed, hate myself. And so it's so backwards. Or it was so backwards in my mind. Like this is not how you do this. Like you get serious, you knuckle down, you discipline, hard sort of masculine energy. And instead, it was this guy who very good physique, but he showed this kindness and this compassion. And it wasn't about enabling. He wasn't saying, "Oh, you've had a hard day, just keep smashing that pizza you're halfway through." But it was about let's understand. Let's look to understand. And so for me to learn that compassion did not mean because I thought, oh, if I show myself kindness, I'll never change. I'll just let myself off the hook. But instead it was this freedom to get curious about my behavior. Why is that happening? And if we understand where the behavior is coming from and why it's happening, we can take steps to begin to change that behavior. And it was like it just blew my mind. And it totally changed my path in life.
So, if you look at it now, so
Mhm,
are you still training with not with the same trainer anymore, but are you still
mhm.
actively training, going to the gym and doing those kind of
Well,
things? And do you have your weight under control?
well, here's what I'll tell people is there is no end to this journey.
Right,
I have to manage my weight like a diabetic has to manage their diabetes.
right,
It is a condition that I have to manage for the rest of my life.
right.
Now, I had a cycling accident about 2 years ago, unfortunately, and injured my shoulder, injured my hip, my left hip, and my right shoulder. And from that time, I've had issues with it. I actually just very recently, at the time of recording this, have found a therapy that's starting to work, but has really impeded my ability to train. Because when you have a lower limb problem and an upper limb problem on opposite sides of your body, it gets really hard to train.
Yeah,
Because I can't hold things. And so, this time though, I was able to approach it differently. So I regained probably about 25 or so pounds. Also, add in there, I have two kids now. Um,
yeah,
which I absolutely adore being a father. I have an almost 3 year old and an almost 6 month old, and oh, I love these boys with every fiber of my being. It is so incredible. But you probably won't get a lot of sleep, and so
yeah,
a
yeah.
mixture of sleep plus these injuries that I was really struggling to bounce back from. Because I had two motorcycle accidents in my 20s, and so it seems like this cycling accident had somehow triggered my nervous system in a way that was going into like super protective mode. And I went through like MRI, X-ray, ultrasound, um, and probably about 10 different practitioners, being like what is wrong? Why doesn't my hip not working? Until I found a therapy that's not very common called PDTR, proprioceptive deep tendon reflex. You'll only find about 25 practitioners in Canada that do this, and I won't spend too much time on it. But what I'll say is most manual therapies deal with the tissue. There's very few, if any, manual therapies outside of PDTR that deal with the nervous system and the
Okay.
software. So we couldn't find anything wrong. So I have an MRI, gold standard. There's no I was like, man, do I have arthritis in my hip from these motorcycle accidents? Nope, there's nothing there. Your hip looks good. And again, it's this mystery. Like, okay, why is this happening to me? What's wrong with it? Well, it's an overprotective nervous system, and so you have to work with the software. It doesn't matter how much you beat the muscle up on a massage or a physio table if you don't deal with the nervous system part of it. And so we've actually started making some really significant progress, and I'm very excited about this. And like I said, I wish there was more people who did PDTR therapy. It's really really cool. I don't know if there's anyone in BC. I know there's about 4 or 5 people in Alberta who does.
Interesting, and so yeah, I had never heard of it, and but especially if if you deal with the physical things and not the nervous system, then that could become the issue, right?
Yeah. The In fact, I would say in my work now, I'm not. I do everything virtually. So I work virtually. I work remotely. I can work with people anywhere in the world. That being well, anyone who has a reasonable grasp of the English language. I did learn to speak some other languages, not enough to, pardon me, not enough to help somebody in a health coaching capacity.
Right,
Um, but I share that to say, I would like to be able to say, I would love to say, hey, I've kept 100 pounds off, but after having that cycling accident combined with having 2 kids, I found that it's without the ability to train and be active the way that I normally was over these last couple of years, while trying to find answers to this. It's harder to keep my weight at bay.
right,
Basically, because now really the only tool I have is nutrition. Um, sleep. I get what I can. I get the best sleep I can. But again, 2 young kids. It's just that phase of life. Um,
right.
so uh, yeah, with that handicap. So I share that because there might be people out there who have a struggle like this, where hey, I had this really successful, tremendous transformation, um, but then I've had this setback, and there's no doubt in my mind I'm going to get back to the healthy weight that I want to be at. Especially now that I've found this therapy that's really helping me regain my mobility. Um,
Right.
but sometimes life hands you something like this. But really, most diet, nutrition, weight loss, sort of health coaching type programs, it's like 3 months, 3 months, or let me create a dependent. So you have to be a part of this program. And as soon as you're no longer a part of this program, um, you're going to struggle on your own. In my work, what I actually try to do, I say I want to create referral business, not repeat business. So I want to create empowered, independent people who don't need to work with me in order to be successful. That they are equipped with the knowledge, the pertinent knowledge, and the tools and the confidence to know that they can do this. Not only can they do this, they can experience a setback and still get this back again. And so a lot of my coaching now is a mixture of behavioral psychology, neurology, so understanding the brain and how it works, along with like the nutrition science and of course the training aspect of it. And so it's a much more well-rounded approach, or as one company calls it, a deep health approach to working with people. And it's absolutely fascinating. I've really found my home in this.
So now you're also an author. So I was
Mm-hmm.
just looking for the title of the book. If you got it there, so you can show it to us.
Oh, I actually haven't got it's actually a ebook. I've written 2 ebooks. One of them was called Crush Your Cravings. Yeah, that's the one. There you
Yeah,
go.
Crush
Available
Your
on
Cravings.
free.
This one, right?
That's the one. Picture of
Yeah,
us smashing a donut on the cover.
I
I
see
never I
that.
never did create physical copies of it, but what I wanted to do was to show people, because here's what plagues most people: nighttime eating, nighttime snacking, cravings for junk food. Now, think of the world that we live in. We live in a world filled with what we call super stimuli. That is, things that stimulate our brain in a way that is unnatural and far beyond what we would experience in the natural world for most of human history. That can be junk food, that can be designer drugs, that can be video games, streaming video, social media, pornography. All of these things exist that stimulate our brains in ways that never existed before in human history.
Right.
Now, pair that with our biological drive to move as little as possible. That was an imperative when calories were scarce, because we still had to move a lot to get food, but move as little as possible, store as much fat as possible, and uh, we now have the perfect conditions for creating a basically worldwide epidemic of obesity.
Yeah.
Now we engineer junk food in particular to hijack your brain. So when you eat that food, your brain doesn't really register the quantity of calories you're eating. And so you could easily eat 500, 600, 700, 800 calories of a junk food and still feel hungry.
Yeah.
And so we live in we live in a world where weight loss is an uphill climb, weight gain is a downhill slide. There's a lot of factors that are against us. The best thing that we can do is begin to understand the world we live in because it's not going to change. This modern, because I just think, for yourself, and think about the world you grew up in as a young man. There weren't computers, let alone social media, streaming video podcasting. Like, you know,
No, was not there.
yeah. So the idea behind Crush Your Cravings was a short book that was actionable that people could take away because this is the biggest struggle. Like watching streaming video and eating junk food at night. Because at night your brain is tired. Your thinking brain, the prefrontal cortex, literally the front of your mind, where you're sort of conscious thinking about should I do this or not, weigh the consequences of my behavior. That part of your brain is tired. Now our brain likes shortcuts. Our brain is kind of lazy and likes tricks. When I feel stressed, I eat junk food, I feel better. Bingo. Our brain learned a new trick. Now there's the impulse to keep doing this. And so Crush Your Cravings is really about, okay, what do I do when this happens? What's a way around this? Because what it feels like, I call it above the neck hunger. We have below the neck hunger and above the neck hunger. What it will feel like when these cravings hit is this is urgent. This is an emergency, and if I don't deal with this right now, things are going to ramp up to like infinity. What turns out, though, most cravings impulses last less than 8 minutes, which is really interesting. So I have a technique in there called FAST, and I explain it in more detail in the book, basically to help you work through cravings when they strike, because it's not a lack of knowledge that people are struggling with. It's access to like junk food, you know, basically at an infinite scale, um, along with the very very stressful modern world that we live in. I say stressful in a cognitive and an emotional way with access to 24/7 information as well. So, anyways, that was the idea behind the book. A very very
So,
simple,
so the other
easily
thing that
consumable.
yeah, the other thing that I found interesting is the four success factors. Nutrition is one, two is
Hmm.
training, three is mindset, and four, recovery and stress management. So those
Yeah,
are the different main categories, right?
right. So there's this term called allostatic load. The kind of the layman's version of it would be it's the sum of all stresses you experience and kind of as it begins to tip over to the excessive side of stress. So we could define stress as anything that demands energy from you. Now, if you go for a walk or a workout, that's a good stress. It's a positive stress. You know, if you're consistently or constantly worried about something like about your business, about your family and things like that, and you have this chronic weight on you, we call it distress. So that's a negative one. But we also have what is the total sum of all stress we experience, both good and bad, and that makes up this allostatic load. Now, whenever we go to embark on this process of change, we have to factor in this allostatic load, this stress load that we're experiencing. What is our capacity to increase our activity? How much can we increase that type of stress? What is our
Oh, okay. But
capacity?
did you? So, Jonathan, just I
Hmm,
just have to get the name again. I missed that. Allostatic stress.
load.
How did you? I didn't
Just
quite get that.
allostatic load.
Allostatic. And what does it
Yeah,
exactly mean? Is that the combination of
this
all stresses?
that's correct. The sum of all stressors that we experience.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So we want to bring that into balance. And so this is
Okay.
what I factor into my professional work is I want to assess because we don't have a gauge, but I want to get an assessment of approximately what is your present allostatic load? What is the sum of all stresses that you experience? And can we bring those into balance? Because as they're brought into balance, we can now create sustainable change. If we try to increase activity, but we don't look at your sleep, if we try to change your nutritional habits, but we don't address stress, we're only addressing part of the equation. And so, like I'm now what's called a national board certified health and wellness coach. Um, that's a fairly specific designation where we deal with health on a broader scale now. It's not just eat less, move more. It's let's also factor these other considerations in so that when we make our recommendations around this, that we're not setting you up to fail down the road when you burn out.
So, the experience that you have, so now you are a coach, and that has
Mhm.
become your, because of your own experience, but also because of your training. Did you receive special training for this earlier in your life?
Well, so at university, I was a chemistry major as well as studying marketing psychology.
Okay,
I joke that I use my superpowers for good now. So psychology, the study of human behavior, and marketing psychology is, how do we get people to buy? How do we get
right.
people to consume these products? But really, it's how do we change people's behavior? And so marketing psychology and purchasing behaviors is not that different from behavioral psychology in and around
No,
food and choices we make, but maybe it's
right.
the other side of the coin. So I had that background. I also did precision nutrition level one, level two, and then now their master health coaching course, and then the national board certification as a health and wellness coach, as well as um, I'm a part of a company that's involved in neuroscience and behavioral psychology research as kind of like a consultant for them and what they're trying to develop.
So you are, I would say, an expert in the field, and that
I
is
would
a
say,
combination of what you were learned in the different elements and the life that you live, because you are an example of all the things that happened to you and brought you through all the phases, and that makes you highly qualified to be a coach, and especially obviously coach people on all the elements that you're already so familiar with. So
mm,
people that
I,
approach you, so how
yeah,
do they approach you? Is it online that you, how do you attract your
truthfully,
client base?
mostly now through podcasting and through my website. So
Okay.
a quick Google search is how a lot of people find me nowadays. I've reduced the amount of time I spend on social media, um, just
Right.
because I found that like I want to be more present with my kids, among other things. And so most people just let freedomnutritioncoach.com. They just find me through my website, and that people can book a free call with me. And the guy that you're talking to now, same guy you're talking to, might even be wearing the same shirt. you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I like what you said about expertise because, and for a long time, I was scared to call myself that because I'm still human and I still struggle, you know? And so I thought, am I really? We call this imposter syndrome, right? But it's this combination of education plus lived experience brings about a type of wisdom and understanding. And then I have the brain that I do. Like I said, I got it free of charge. I can't take the credit, but I have a very good memory and a very good brain for like figuring out how things work. I have an engineering brain. And so people, when they come to me and share their problems, like my brain is just running calculations and going, okay, I see what this person needs. Now I just have to help guide them to the place where they actually buy into what I'm trying to guide them towards in terms of better behaviors. So much of coaching is not information, but it's working collaboratively with someone to get them to buy in. That's why it's called coaching. It's
Yeah.
not guruship. It's not you do what I tell you because I'm smarter than you. It's
No.
let's work together and figure out like what works for you. And so I love being a coach.
So I love this conversation because, I'm trying to make a connection between yourself, myself. As I already said earlier, I was born November the 1st, 1940. Was
Mm,
exposed, and as you well know, that was the beginning of the world. The Second World War was exposed to all
yes,
kinds
yeah.
of things. We're far too close to all the things that happened, resulting in PTSD and a child issues. I was not very successful in school. I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 7 3 times. Kind of felt that I had been a
Hey,
failure. And
yeah.
then I felt I had to start all over again, but somewhere else, because in Holland at the time it worked this way, is that at some point you're going to get married or you apply for a job in your career, buy a house, And then no matter what you do, you interact with people, and then the first thing they say, okay, where are your diplomas? Well, I didn't have any. But so
Right. Yeah.
but the one thing that I have, and when you mention it, I have an exceptional memory, even at 83, and I'm very good at
Ah,
numbers, but I was not very good in school. And so I felt then we were liberated by the Canadian Army, April the 12th, 1945. And I knew then that at some point I would go to Canada, to the land of my heroes. And I did
hmm.
when I was 23. And I came to BC. My grandfather was a master carpenter. My dad worked in the lumber industry. I wanted to build a lumber mill. And I wanted to
Hmm.
start with nothing. So I had a suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and 150 Canadian dollars when I left Amsterdam. And I wanted to go to BC because that's where all the timber is. And I came to Vancouver, and I couldn't speak the language, didn't know a soul, didn't have a job. And
Yeah.
fortunately, at the immigration department, there was a German fellow, and I could speak some German. I told him what I wanted to do. He said, go to Prince George. That's where they're building the sawmills, the pulp mills, plywood plants. That's where the opportunities are. So when I came off the bus, I can still virtually, I've been in now 60 years in Prince George. I can virtually see the Greyhound station where I arrived, and I had a suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and I counted my money at least 3 times, and I had $25.47. But I had a dream, and I had attitude. Is that no matter how challenges things are today, they will be better tomorrow. I'm a perpetual optimist about things will be better, and I had the passion. No matter what I do, I give it 150%. And then I had work ethic. I work harder than anybody, and and what will follow is success. And and
Yeah.
so, but then even already when started from nothing, very quickly I became a superintendent of one of the larger mills here within a year and a half. Within 2.5 years, I had part of a sawmill in Watson Lake, Yukon Territory, of which for
Okay.
our guests
Oh,
watching us from around the world is the right next to Alaska. The coldest I've seen it there is 62 below zero. Anyway, so I was there for 5 years, became an entrepreneurial there, and then gave it all away at some point. It's all part of my book that I will show you shortly. And then went back to Prince George and started in 1975, started my company, Brink Forest Products. And then from there on in, it became the Brink Group, and we have 3 silos. The one is lumber, the other one is warehousing, logistics, and distribution, and the other silo is real estate, residential, commercial, and industrial. So quite
yeah.
successful actually, but that's not the story. But then it took me 32 years, and until January 1997. Already I was quite successful here, and and people said to me, "Oh, you're so successful." I didn't feel that way. I felt I still had failed in a way, and then I walked into a store here, and I took a book, and I don't know why I did that. And the book's title was "Driven to Distraction," written by Dr.
Hmm.
Halliwell in 1993. And it was about ADHD. And I said,
Yes.
oh my God, that's me. I bought the book and I wrote in it in Dutch because I was ashamed of it. Is now I finally know who I am. And so the more I
Uh,
found out about it on Google and checking around it, then the more I thought about it, and then it took me 5 years till I was 62. I picked up the book when I was 57. It took me 5 years before I go to my doc that delivered our 2 daughters and was a personal friend. And he said, "Hey, John, why are you here?" I said, "I think I got ADHD." And we checked it out, and yeah, I do. And so that was a major turn for me. And I started to speak about it publicly because I believe it's a superpower. And then I wrote a book about it, ADHD Unlocked, very
Uh,
popular. And, it is not only for ADHD, but the other part about ADHD, it was believed that 8% of the population have the benefit or are affected by ADHD. It's an asset, not a liability in my mind. And I believe that is well over 20%. Now, the interesting part, the book was written by Dr. Halliwell in 1993. I bought it in 1997. I interviewed him on a podcast 2 weeks ago as the two of us
uh,
talked again. And so I mentioned it to him. I think it is, and I read his books, and he has written about 18 as a doctorate, in medical doctor, PhD, ADHD. And that when I said to him, I believe it is well over 20%, he said, "No, John, it's over 25% ADHD." And then I said, the other
right.
part that I believe most of the successful, and successful is up, is the critical part here, CEOs, at least 50% of them are ADHD. He said, "No,
Good.
John, at least 75%." and
Okay.
and so and so it changed my life in a way, or at least it gave me clarity. And then the other
Uh,
part is that I was not very good at communicating, and part of that was being self-conscious. Grade 3 failure, and then grade 7, and on and on. So I was good inside my circle of where my mills. And then the other part that helped change my life at a later stage in my life, actually, when I was 50, an ex-sister-in-law that I had took me to, she said, "Why don't you go with me to a club, they call it Toastmasters?" And I said, "Okay,
yeah.
what do they do there?" He said, "Well, you sit there, and then, you can learn to become better communicators in speaking and all of those kind of things." I said, "Are they going to ask me any questions?" And she said, No, they won't. You just sit there." Halfway through the meeting, they said, somebody stood up and said, "Hey, John, tell us about you." And I said, "Oh my God, I'll never go back here." So, but that's the other part. I stayed there for 10 years, became
Okay.
a distinguished Toastmaster at the highest level of Toastmasters, which again helped to change my life. But I'm
Mm,
kind of and so what has happened for me, well after I was 62, and kind of found these different areas around my life that had created my life, changed my life. The effect of the Second World War, and PTSD and a child, then leaving for Canada, the feeling of failure, the Toastmasters, and then, obviously finding ADHD. And so then what I did is I wrote a number of books about this 5 years ago. Somebody already told me, at some point you have such an interesting life, you have to write a book about it. Well, writing books is not easy, and you already know
okay.
that.
have,
And
I have another one in the works. Yes.
yeah, so I kept writing for about 20 years, start, stop, start, stop. And I knew if at 83 now, if I didn't do 5, 6 years ago, it would never happen. And so
Right.
I started doing it, and I produced a biography, is Against All Odds. And it's not so
Uh,
much about how successful John is, it's more about all the ups and downs and the challenges. I'll sign a copy, I'll send it to you. And then the
oh,
other one that I felt so strongly about, that I have an obligation to speak about it wherever possible, is about ADHD. And so I
Mm,
wrote that book, as I showed you earlier, ADHD, and I'll send you a copy of that too and sign it. And then the other part that I found, Jonathan, is that so many people don't like what they do, and they don't like their jobs. And then I heard something
mm,
on one of the major U.S. newscasts, that is CNN or one of them, and say that 70% of the population don't like their jobs, and
yeah,
75% of the 70% are looking for other jobs. And then the other
yeah,
part that I found, I do a lot of presentations to students, and I always ask them, I said, what are you going to do, you know, for a career? And say, well, I don't know. I said, well, maybe try to, my recommendation would check it out. Find out what people do. What are they doing? You want to be a welder, or you want to be a truck driver, but you want to be a mechanic, or you want to be a lawyer, or you want to be a doctor, or talk to the professions. A lot of these people don't mind talking
yeah.
to people that want to get ideas, or for that matter, talk to a CEO or an entrepreneur to give you ideas. So I felt I had to write a book about it. So I wrote this one, Finding Your Passion, Living the Dream.
I love that. Yeah.
And then the other one that you may find interesting is that, I nearly died in 2008. I got a case of diverticulitis that ruptured. And it's your
Mm,
larger
yeah,
colon that then, creates all kinds of issues that attack the area of the critical area around there. And if you're not in time, then it affects everything. So, but I just made
it
it,
does.
and
Yeah.
then it kind of changed my life and saying, okay, I need to become more serious about diet. My wife is vegetarian, and I call myself 80/20. And I became more
Yeah.
serious about my physical health, also being overweight a lot of times. And I started to go to the gym in a serious way, not
Wonderful.
like we all go to make a decision at the end of the year. We're gonna go to the gym. We buy the membership. We go 2 weeks, and then we can find 100 reasons as to why we can't go anymore. Because we're just too
Yeah.
busy. And so I started doing that, and then as I did that for about 6 7 years, somebody came up to me. I'm working with my trainer and said, "Have you ever thought about competing?" And I said, "Me?" And so I said, "Why not?" And so I did that, and then competed in 2017, 2018, qualified for Northern BC bodybuilding physique in my group.
Wow.
Qualified for that. Then went to the BC one, and then qualified there again for the nationals and the Arnolds. And
Wow.
then obviously what happened is COVID came, and so now I'm training again for the Arnolds. I talked to Arnold already. He said, "Yeah, in 25 I'm going to go there when I'm 85." Here's a picture of what I'm doing, and
I love that.
so I'm writing a book there,
And
Living Young, Dying Old. And that has a lot to do
nice.
with what you were talking about, because it is developing the routine of going to the gym, is mental health, physical health, and then diet and maintaining that. And then it's not so much, that's what the book is about. It's not so much the number, it's quality of life. And so
Absolutely.
even now still, I usually get up at 5:30 in the morning. I always think I'm late. I always make my bed actually, and then still work usually around 10, 12 hours a day, 60, 70 hours a week, and love what I'm doing and all the things that I'm doing, and that's what life is all about.
It is. And no need to retire.
No, I said I retire when I'm old. I want to be 120.
Okay. That's a great way of thinking about it. So you might just be the one to make it there. I mean, you're bright, you're sharp, your brain's in good shape. You keep your brain active through like the demands of business. It's a use it or lose it scenario, especially at your age. And so you keep working hard to make sure you keep it.
Yeah, and the fortunate part that I have is a lot of people say, well, you got 10 different companies. They say, well, how do you do all of that? You do podcasting, one of the more active ones, and then you write all
Mm.
these books and you have the businesses and you do be a speaker. How do you do all of this? I say ADHD.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah,
reason, you know.
yeah. Yeah, earlier this year I was diagnosed with ADHD. So I was like, oh, my life makes sense now.
Yeah,
So yes.
and it does because what it does is that most and that's why people that have ADHD are so good at being entrepreneurs or founders or CEOs. They have the ability to think outside of that box. And
Mm.
so that's what I do. I have an, as you do, an amazing memory, even at my age. And then I'm very good with numbers. And then I'm a visionary. And so I look forward 5, 10, 15, 20 years, 30 years. I'm very good at that. And then I'm a very good speaker, especially considering from what it used to be. And so, and I like that and, do all those kind of things.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, my current podcast is on hiatus right now, just for a couple of months while I take care of a few business things. But I do intend it to return here within a couple of months. I think you'd make a very interesting guest. It's called Between the Before and After, and we explore people's stories of overcoming adversity. And so you've got quite the story.
So, so make sure you stay in touch with Scott. And then,
Will do. Yeah.
this again, an amazing story on your side, Jonathan. And tell us again what your website is so that
Mm.
people can, look at your website and contact you potentially.
Yeah. freedomnutritioncoach.com. Uh,
Okay,
and from there, you can just book.
freedomnutrition.com.
Yeah, you can book a free call with me. You'll chat with me just like you see me today.
Excellent. And Jonathan, it was a pleasure and a privilege to podcast you. And let's make sure we stay in touch. Contact Scott to get me lined up on one of your podcasts.
Would love to do that. Thank you so much. It's been a
And
pleasure.
then this one, Jonathan, just before we close, is that we
Mm.
release it the following day. So this one will be released tomorrow morning. And I make very
Amazing.
few changes to what we do. That's what we always do. The only time of U210 for me, and the only time that we made slight changes to our podcast is that I introduced my guest. The next thing, the whole building started shaking. We had an earthquake. We
Okay.
even left that part in. So
Well, that's awesome.
so you'll get it tomorrow.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you
Jonathan,
so much.
take care. My pleasure.